My best friend said I got his mentally ill sister pregnant. My parents disowned me without proof, but when the paternity test proved my innocence, my parents sued me, and the judge left them speechless. I'm 26 years old. I work in digital marketing for a mid-sized company, and honestly, I need to tell this story because what happened to me like a year and a half ago still has me processing a lot of things. Basically, my best friend since high school has a sister, Kristen, who's always had mental health issues, like she's been in and out of therapy for as long as I can remember. And one day she decided to tell everyone that I had gotten her pregnant. And when I say everyone, I mean everyone, including my parents who believed her instead of me, their own son, and disowned me completely. That's how crazy this whole thing was. And the truth is that even now that I have irrefutable proof of my innocence, things are still a mess. Blake has been my best friend since we were like 13. We met in middle school and basically grew up together, like that friendship where you know each other so well you don't even need to talk, to know what the other is thinking. You know what I mean? His family was always kind of complicated. His younger sister Kristen was like 3 years younger than us, and from an early age she showed signs that something wasn't right. I'm not going to get into medical details because that's not really my place, but let's just say Kristen has dealt with serious mental health issues since adolescence. She's been medicated. She's had episodes where she loses touch with reality, that kind of thing. Blake was always super protective of her. Obviously, she's his sister, but he was also aware that she needed professional help. I was always cordial with Kristen. I mean, she was my best friend's sister. I'd see her at family gatherings, birthday parties, that kind of thing. But we never had a close relationship beyond that. I always kept my distance. Not because she was a bad person or anything, but because honestly I was a bit uncomfortable with the intensity with which she sometimes looked to me or talked to me. Like there was something weird about the way she interacted with me that made me nervous. Blake had warned me years ago that Kristen sometimes developed obsessions with people, that it was part of her condition. So I was always conscious about maintaining clear and healthy boundaries. My relationship with my parents before all this drama was, let's say, normal but not particularly close. They're from that more traditional generation, where the man has to be responsible, a provider, all those things. They always had high expectations for me. They wanted me to be successful, to start a family, the typical conservative vision of what my life should be like. We weren't fighting or anything, but we also weren't the type who talk every day or share everything. We'd see each other at family dinners, holidays, birthdays, basically the bare minimum to maintain the appearance of a functional family. Everything started falling apart. Like in March of last year, I think, or maybe it was late February. I don't remember the exact date, but I do remember the moment perfectly. I was at my apartment. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I get a call from Blake, who sounded extremely upset, like I'd never heard him that stressed. He tells me we need to talk urgently, that it's about Kristen, and I obviously got worried thinking something bad had happened to her, like she was in the hospital or something. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop near his house, and when I got there, Blake had that look of not having slept in days. He was all pale and nervous. He sits down and drops the bomb on me without any kind of preparation. He tells me, Kristen is pregnant, and she says, "You're the father." I just sat there for like 5 seconds in complete silence because honestly my brain wasn't processing what I'd just heard. Then I started laughing because I thought it was a bad joke. But Blake wasn't laughing. He was completely serious. I told him, "Dude, what? That's literally impossible." And he just shook his head, saying that Kristen was insisting that I was the father, that we'd been together, that I don't know what else. I was in complete shock. Like, where had this come from? I explained to Blake in great detail that I had never, and when I say never, I mean never, had any kind of intimate contact with Kristen. I reminded him of all the times I'd specifically avoided being alone with her precisely because she made me uncomfortable. I showed him my work calendar, where he could see that during the months, she was saying something had happened. I'd been traveling for work or had been with my ex-girlfriend Amber practically every day. Blake believed me. I could see it in his eyes, but he was also in a horrible position because she was his sister, I suggested we do a prenatal paternity test. I mean, there are tests you can do during pregnancy that are completely safe and can determine paternity with certainty. I told him, look, if she's so Sure, let's do the test and this gets resolved once and for all. I have nothing to hide. Blake agreed and went to talk to Kristen, but she flat out refused to take the test. She said it was dangerous for the baby, which is false. Modern tests are super safe. That she didn't need to prove anything, that she knew the truth, and that was enough. That refusal to take the test should have been a giant red flag for everyone. But well, apparently it wasn't. Things got worse when Kristen decided to tell her parents. And Blake's parents are close to mine, like they've known each other for years, they go to the same church, all that stuff. So my parents found out, and I got a call from my mother, who was literally screaming on the phone, telling me how I could have been so irresponsible, how I could have done that to that poor girl, that I had to accept my responsibilities as a man. I tried to explain to her that it wasn't true, that nothing had ever happened between Kristen and me, but I wouldn't listen to me, she just kept yelling. My father was worse. He summoned me to my parents' house. He didn't live there anymore. I'd had my own apartment for like 3 years, and when I arrived, they were both sitting in the living room with that look of total disappointment that makes you feel like you're 5 years old again. My father started with a sermon about responsibility, about how a real man assumes the consequences of his actions, about family honor, basically the whole traditional speech you can imagine. I tried to defend myself. I showed them my work calendar. I explained that during the period when this supposedly happened, I wasn't even in the same state most of the time. Here comes the part that still boils my blood when I remember it. I told them, look, during the months of November and December last year, which was when the conception supposedly occurred according to the dates Kristen was giving, I was in California for 3 weeks in November for a work project. I have the plane tickets. I have the hotel reservations. I have everything documented. And in December I was with Amber practically every day. She can confirm it. We have dated photos together. We have messages. We have everything. But you know what they told me? That evidence could be falsified, that maybe I was lying, that Kristen had no reason to lie about something like that. That hurt more than I can explain, like the fact that my own parents chose to believe a girl they barely knew, who they knew had mental health issues, over believing me, their son. I begged them to at least wait until the baby was born to do an official paternity test. I told them I was willing to do it immediately after birth, and that would prove my innocence once and for all. But they wanted me to take responsibility now, to start providing for Kristen and the baby, to prepare to be a father, all this without any real proof that the child was mine. The straw that broke the camel's back was when they told me that either I accepted paternity and started acting like a responsible father, or they would consider me dead to them. That was literal. My father said those exact words, that if I didn't step up and do the right thing, he would no longer have a son. I sat there processing that they were giving me an ultimatum, that they were willing to cut me out of their lives completely for refusing to accept responsibility for a child that wasn't mine, for an act that had never occurred. I told them no, that I wasn't going to accept being the father of a child that wasn't mine just to please them or to save face, and my father literally pointed to the door and told me to leave. I left that house feeling like I'd been hollowed out inside. I called Blake crying in my car. I couldn't even drive. And he was devastated too because he knew all this was his sister's fault but couldn't do anything about it. He told me he'd tried to talk to Kristen, that he'd begged her to tell the truth, but she was standing firm in her story. She'd even started making up details about supposed encounters we'd had, places where we'd supposedly been together, things that literally never happened. The next few months were an absolute nightmare. My parents weren't talking to me. They'd blocked my number. When I tried to go see them, they wouldn't open the door. Blake's family was divided. Some believed me, and others thought I was lying. The church community where my parents went started whispering about me, like the typical small-town gossip where everyone knows everything about everyone. My reputation was destroyed, and I couldn't do anything but wait for the baby to be born so I could do the paternity test and clear my name. The baby was born in August. It was a girl from what I learned later, and I immediately requested an official paternity test through the court. Kristen had no choice but to accept because it was a court order. The test was done like a week after birth. They took DNA, samples from the baby, from Kristen and from me, and then it was a matter of waiting for the results. Those 2 weeks of waiting were the longest of my life. Not because I had doubts about the result. I knew 100% I wasn't the father, but because I needed that official validation. I needed that paper that said in black and white that I'd been telling the truth all this time. The results came back, and it was exactly what I knew it was going to be. 0% probability that I was the father. Literally zero. Not even 1% or a margin of error. It was impossible for that baby to be mine. I sent the results to my parents by certified mail, along with a letter where I basically told them they were right about one thing. They no longer had a son, because after what they'd done to me, after choosing to believe a stranger over me, after disowning me without any real proof, I didn't want to know anything about them either. I thought with those results everything was going to be resolved, that I was going to receive apologies, that things were going to go back to normal, but no, things got worse. My parents showed up at my apartment like 3 days after receiving the results, knocking on the door at 7 in the morning on a Sunday. I opened the door because honestly I expected a sincere apology. I expected them to at least acknowledge they'd been wrong. My mother was crying. My father looked embarrassed, and they started with a speech about how sorry they were, that they'd made a mistake, that they wanted to fix things. But here's the thing, their apologies weren't really apologies, they were justifications. My mother was saying any parent would have done the same, that they just wanted to make sure the baby was taken care of, that it was their moral duty to pressure me to do the right thing. My father said that although they'd been wrong in this specific case, their intentions were good, and that I should understand they acted out of love. Not once did they say, "We were wrong. We failed you. We destroyed our relationship by believing someone else instead of trusting you. Forgive us." On top of that, they brought a check, like they thought they could buy my forgiveness with money. It was for a considerable amount, like $10,000 or something, and they offered it to me, saying it was to help me recover from all the stress I'd been through, to compensate for the damage. I looked at that check and felt so much rage that my hands were literally shaking. I told them to shove their money where the sun don't shine, that they couldn't buy my forgiveness, that what they'd done couldn't be fixed with a check and a half apology. I explained to them that they'd abandoned me at the worst possible time, that when I needed them most, they'd turned their backs on me without even really listening to me, that they'd destroyed years of relationship in a matter of weeks by believing someone else. My father tried to interrupt me, but I kept talking. I told him that his ultimatum had worked, that indeed I no longer had parents because I didn't want to know anything about them after this either. My mother started crying harder, saying I was being cruel, that they were my parents, and I had to forgive them, but I was fed up. I kicked them out of my apartment and told them not to come back, not to call me, not to look for me, that as they themselves had said, we were dead to each other. I closed the door and stood there in my living room, feeling a weird mix of relief and sadness, because on one hand, I'd taken a weight off my shoulders by telling them everything I felt, but on the other hand, I'd just cut ties with my parents probably forever. I thought that was the end of it, that I could finally move on with my life, rebuild my reputation, recover from the trauma of all this, but Kristen still hadn't finished ruining my life. Like, 2 weeks later, I started receiving messages from people asking me about the paternity test results, saying they'd heard rumors that I'd falsified the results, that I'd paid the lab to say I wasn't the father. Kristen was spreading rumors everywhere, telling anyone who would listen that I was the father, but that I'd manipulated the test. This is where everything got really crazy. My parents, instead of defending the truth, instead of telling people that the official court test had proven my innocence, started their own PR campaign. They started contacting my friends, my acquaintances, coworkers, basically anyone they knew from my social circle, telling them their version of the story where they were the victims, where I was the cruel son who had rejected them unfairly. I found out about this because an old high school friend, Marcus, called me one day and said, "Dude, your parents contacted me on Facebook and wrote me like 3 pages about how you treated them horribly, how you don't want to forgive them, how you're an ungrateful son. I need you to know I didn't believe. Tell them it all, but I thought you should know they're doing this." I thanked Marcus for letting me know and started investigating. I checked my social media, and sure enough, my parents had been contacting practically everyone who appeared on my friends list. But the straw that really broke the camel's back was when my parents called my workplace. They talked to my boss, expressing concerns about my mental state, saying I was going through a crisis, that I'd abandoned my family, that they were worried about my well-being. My boss called me into his office, obviously confused because I'd been a model employee. I'd never shown signs of having problems, and asked me what was going on. I had to sit down and explain the whole situation from beginning to end. Show him the paternity test results, explain that my parents had disowned me for refusing to accept responsibility for a child that wasn't mine. My boss was incredibly understanding. He believed me completely and basically told my parents not to contact the workplace again, that if they had personal problems with me, they should resolve them outside my work environment. But the damage was already done. Now my coworkers knew there was family drama. Some looked at me weird. Others asked me if I was okay. It was awkward and humiliating to have to explain over and over that no, I didn't abandon a child, no, I didn't falsify any test. Yes, my parents are harassing me. That's when I decided I needed to take legal action. I contacted a lawyer, Jonathan, who specialized in family law and harassment, and explained the whole situation to him. Jonathan told me I had a solid case for a restraining order, that my parents' behavior constituted harassment and was affecting my work and personal life. We filed the restraining order request with all the documentation, the messages they'd sent to my friends, the records of calls to my work. Everything. The judge approved the restraining order basically immediately, which told me a lot about how obvious it was that my parents had crossed the line. The order specified they couldn't contact me directly or indirectly, that they couldn't approach my apartment or my workplace, that basically they had to stay completely away from me. They were notified of the order, and I thought finally, I was going to have peace. But no. Turns out it still wasn't over. Like a week after they were notified of the restraining order, I leave work and see my car, and someone had keyed the word liar all along the driver's side. I don't have proof it was my parents. There were no cameras in that parking lot, but the timing was too convenient to be coincidence. I made a report to the police, showed them the restraining order, but without proof they couldn't do anything. Then came the most absurd thing of all this. Like 2 months after the restraining order, I received notification that my parents were suing me. Yes, you read that right. They were suing me. The lawsuit was for emotional distress. They claimed I had caused them psychological suffering by rejecting their forgiveness and by obtaining the restraining order against them. Jonathan almost laughed when he saw the lawsuit. He told me it was one of the most ridiculous things he'd seen in his career, that they had no legal basis, but that we still had to respond and show up in court. The legal process was long and exhausting. I had to relive the whole story again, present all the evidence, the paternity test results, the harassment messages, everything. My parents hired a lawyer who basically argued that they'd only acted as concerned parents, that I was being cruel by not forgiving them, that they deserved compensation for the pain I'd caused them. It was surreal to hear their lawyer paint me as the villain of this story when they'd been the ones who disowned me without any real proof. The court ruled in my favor. Obviously, the judge basically said the lawsuit had no merit, that I had every right to establish boundaries with my parents after what had happened, that the restraining order was justified given the documented pattern of harassment. On top of that, the judge ordered my parents to pay my legal fees, which were already several $1,000s at that point. Jonathan told me it was a complete victory, that he rarely saw a judge be so direct in their ruling. But for me, it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like another exhausting battle in a war I never asked to fight. I was emotionally drained. I'd spent months of my life dealing with this. I'd lost my parents. My reputation was damaged. I'd had to spend money on lawyers, although in the end they reimbursed me. And all for what? For the delusional fantasy of a girl with mental health problems that no one had questioned enough before everything exploded. Blake and I are still friends, although our friendship never went back to being the same. How could it be? His sister had destroyed my life and my family, and even though it wasn't his fault, there was always that awkward tension between us. Eventually, the friendship started fading. We see each other occasionally. We send each other messages from time to time. But we're no longer the inseparable best friends we were before. It's sad, but it's reality. Like 3 months ago, I received a message from my cousin, Sophia, who told me my parents are planning a big family reunion, like they're inviting all the extended family. And apparently the whole purpose of the reunion is to force a reconciliation with me. Sophia told me my parents had asked her and other family members to convince me to go. That they're saying enough time has passed, that we need to heal as a family, all that rhetoric. I responded to Sophia with a long email where I basically made all my boundaries crystal clear. I explained that I have no interest in reconciling with my parents, that they had multiple opportunities to make things right and chose to keep causing me harm, that their behavior, after my innocence was proven, was as bad or worse than their initial behavior. I told her I appreciate that she's trying to mediate, but my decision is final, that I'm not going to any family reunion, that I'm not going to respond to any contact attempts, that basically my relationship with my parents is dead and buried. I also wrote an email to my parents, even though it violated my own no-contact rule, but I felt they needed to hear this directly from me one last time. I told them I understand they probably think I'm cruel or that I'm being too harsh, but that they don't understand the deep damage they caused me. I explained that it wasn't just that they disowned me, it was that they chose a stranger's version over mine. It was that they gave me an ultimatum when I was telling the truth. It was that even after my innocence was proven, they couldn't give a real apology. It was that they harassed me, contacted my work, spread rumors, and finally sued me. I told them their behavior. It wasn't a simple mistake. It was a consistent pattern of prioritizing their own ideas of how things should be over really listening to me, trusting me, supporting me. I explained that forgiveness isn't something that can be demanded or bought, that it has to be earned, and that they haven't done absolutely anything to earn it except cause more harm. I wished them the best in their lives, but made it very clear that I wouldn't be part of them, that they should respect my decision and stop trying to force something that no longer exists. Now I'm focused on rebuilding my life without them. I've been going to therapy to process all this, because honestly, the trauma of having your own parents turn their backs on you like that is something you don't get over easily. I've been reconnecting with friends who supported me through all this. I've been investing in my career, basically trying to create a life where I don't need my parents' validation or support to feel whole. Last week, I was at the grocery store, and I saw my mother in the aisle across from me. She saw me too. I could see on her face that she wanted to approach, that she wanted to say something, but she just stood there. I just kept walking. I didn't greet her. I didn't make eye contact after the first second. I just continued with my shopping as if I hadn't seen her. When I left the grocery store, I felt a weird mix of things. Part of me felt bad, because, at the end of the day, she's my mother, but the bigger part of me felt relieved that she'd respected the space and hadn't tried to confront me. I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive my parents. Honestly, right now I don't see how that could happen. The damage is too deep and too recent. Maybe in 10 years, maybe in 20, maybe never, I don't know. What I do know is that I made the right decision by putting myself first, by establishing firm boundaries, by not letting them keep hurting me just because they're family. Isn't just blood, it's trust, it's support, it's believing in someone when everyone else doubts, and my parents showed they couldn't give me that when I needed it most.